Start. Okay, so today we are here with George and Marv, who had the opportunity to look at Smoke Behind the Rope. Um, what were your first impressions in watching the play?
Well, I had the opportunity of seeing a few scenes before I actually saw the production in the theater, and I had a chance to read a little bit of the script. So I was coming in with some prior knowledge of the content. Um, I come to the work from a research-based theater lens, which Razgar's work really resonates with that genre in the sense that it is theater that is based on either documented uh, history or interviews, etc. And I think this play in particular, Razgar was drawing from artifacts that he was able to glean, though also a lot from memory and what he's heard, which lends itself quite nicely to theater because then it moves us to the imagination. So the genre of bringing so-called research-based theater in a theater space, if I think of going to that space in Yaletown, I think of the theater experience right from the get-go as you walk into a space. So first of all, you're around the streets in that area, and it's a very affluent area. Everyone is drinking $7 coffees and $12 juices, and there's affluence, there's freedom. And then you walk in to the community center, and it's a lovely kind of dynamic, diverse space. There's like basketball courts, and you could see that there was a diversity of folks playing basketball. And then we walk into this kind of ominous lobby space that could be a holding ground for something. It could be where people are shifted. I mean, it's the trains were shifted there. It's kind of cold, I would say, like the floor was cement and big walls. And so I felt, and then you didn't know, you had to go through a small entrance to get into the theater space. So I was taken, that whole journey there was for me the beginning. Okay, now we're going to visit a couple of cells in some ways, but outside the world is constantly existing. So I'll just talk. Yeah, that's kind of maybe I'll stop there so Mark can jump in. But that was kind of entering into the space for me was that's what took place.
Okay, thanks, George. That kind of parallels what I'm saying. You need somebody, some event in this to induct us down into the depth of the darkness where we see these two people. Second is the screen set for me. I don't know much about it, but it was too white. It didn't look messy enough. Like all of a sudden they're in kind of white gyprock stills. I thought there might be graffiti and so on and so forth. So anyhow, that's just a small thing. And I want the darkness to come into the psychic self by just being there. Oh my God, this is haunting. There's a doom base. So that's the second thing I would say. The other thing that I would add is the performers. Wouldn't it be great if the performers could be actors who were from an oppressed regime where they actually lived or knew this more intimately, because these were very skilled actors, but they didn't grow up in that region, did they?
Not as far as I know.
No. So I mean, they performed very well, but again, it would, I don't know, this is just my prejudice. If they even spoke with an accented form of English, then this is even more real. Like this is going on. So that's, and then the very end, what I made the note was after we go into the play, and I thought the play was really however prepared and directed, and because it was very, I would call it very action oriented, a lot of movement, a lot of expression, intonation. That was extremely well done. kind of when people are caged animals, they would go from elation to fear to whatever, and smashing down the walls symbolically. But what I think would be very impressive at the very end, if all of a sudden it's over and the two actors stand up and then two other people come up onto the stage who maybe had lived or are familiar with their experience and just comment very briefly. I was with you. I was in the audience and I have been there, and the impact of this play on me is the following. So at the beginning, Risgar comes on, contextualizes it. At the end, it adds again validation, because in Canada we have prisons and so on. If you ever worked in them, you know what they're like. But most people are innocent until proven guilty, whereas it sounds like in these regimes they're guilty until they're killed. So I think that it would be really uplifting for the audience and powerful if there's voice by two other people from those regimes could then attest to this. And in Canada, or at least, it's very valuable for someone who's lived there when they watch a theater piece says, what they're doing there is they've let us into their worlds. And the only thing, so that's all that I would say. Beginning and the ending should be contextualized a little more, in my opinion.
And George wanted to interject.
Yeah, I just was building on what Marv. I think what you're saying as well. So several things that you shared there. The research-based theater, as we conceptualize it, it constantly evolves and emerges. One of the so-called principles that we do use is kind of a 3-act structure. And the first act is what Marv is talking about, is some kind of introduction of the context, and whether it's someone with a lived experience or someone who has studied it or et cetera, to kind of gently immerse the audience into this genre of theater. So, and then the second act, so that's the first act, and that can be done in various ways. And then the second act is the play itself that takes the most time to generate, create, write, and perform. And then the third act is how did we leave the audience, leaving the theater with certain thoughts about the context. And again, that's usually curated with someone leading either a discussion or making some comments about their lived experience. Now, so it's not everyone who likes that model of research-based theater, because it sounds very academic. There's a sense of I don't know, that you have to prepare the audience, that they can't just walk in and take it in when they go see a film. So the choice to do that is one. It can be one or the other, or a combination of both. But I think what Marv is speaking to is really the ethos of research-based theater allows more, I think, opportunities for people to go, okay, this is a real context. Now we're going to see something fictional that's based on that. And then so you kind of enter. So that 3-act structure, the constraint sometimes for theater makers is that they just want to show. They didn't want to do that telling at the beginning and the end. But I think where Marv and I sit with the work that we're engaged in typically is that we want to make sure that we, like, ethically, that we prepare people, and at the end also just check in how people are doing. But the theater world doesn't operate that way, and Razgar's company is really moving more potentially towards theater than research-based theater. So that's how I saw it.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, George, Scott, when you mentioned just those 2 sentences you gave about this is very, very serious. This play is about they're going to be killed. Is that true?
As far as my conversations with Razgar, there are contexts in which people are transitioned from prisons to be killed at some point. Yes. But
George, wouldn't that be part of their dialogue in the script? You're going to die. I know I'm going to die. So what the hell? Like, let's let's just blow this, whatever. But I didn't hear the threat of death. I thought it was going to be a hearing.
That would be the dramaturgy to
Okay.
let the audience know that there's this weight at all times, but never.
Okay.
And it's kind of a human kind of thing, is that we all know that we're going to die as well, and many of us try to think that we're going to live till 150. I mean, you, Marv, you might, with your health and balanced lifestyle, like
right.
a spritey young man, and so. But I think it probably got edited out, Marv, and that's I think when we're talking about the intro and the outro, you can be more explicit, but let the theater piece.
Okay.
It'd be good, Marv, when you mentioned also the physicality. I thought that was really one of the strengths of the piece.
Yes,
was just the being, even though it was white and dreamy in some ways, it was the possibilities. They sucked out the marrow of what was possible within that. They tried not to paint the bleakness. They tried to say, okay, we've only got whatever 10 hours. Let's be as positive as we can. And the freedom of the body, I thought was great. Again, because I've seen a lot of plays based on research and where it's very talk, and it's text, because it's hard to translate those emotions into the body. But there was no issues there. That the chemistry between Razgar's direction, the text, and the actors was that it invited this space. They just used the whole space.
Yes,
so
they did.
They kind of pushed the cells, like they expanded the possibilities. And and that's a credit to artistic choices that they made to say, okay, let's not be beaten down by the system. Despite what you're saying, that we knew there was like literally no hope. Or I mean, we were reminded with sounds where other people were kind of being taken out of their cells. Or
just following that, then I think Razgar should take credit for the fact that their animation, their activation, their life force re-established that this is a tragedy. It was really, this is a tragedy, this play.
Wow.
Like any of the early Shakespearean plays, and why it comes across as what could have been versus what is. And they're fighting, they're held down, and yet they have such verve and life in them, which makes it more tragic. So he's accomplished that. That's what hit me, is so strong. So I think it's enormously valuable play, even for theater rather than research, in this way. This regime represents one of many regimes in the world today where this is probably going on. So I think it's extremely relevant in Canada, because we as a population go to sleep on these things because of our own legal system and the concept of justice, although not perfect. And people, they have to be shaken up to say, these people in silence are being wiped out. And that's his contribution as newcomers, new Canadians to this country, as an asset for them, because only they can convey the message that I'm sitting there, and this isn't just somebody who's a good writer. These are about the lived experience of humans. And by him coming on at the beginning and having validation by two other people, maybe who served or whatever, and then the performance itself, extremely well done. So I think he's almost there. But he needs to appear, because he's a dynamic, sincere, committed guy.
Marv, what happens?
Or his equivalent. Okay.
Marv, what happens? What happens to people in context of war, in context of confinement?
Yes. What happens?
Psychologically, yes.
Sorry?
Psychologically, yes.
Oh, no, a lot of their behavior, actually, they develop what would be considered behavior indicative of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And it's impulsive, acute depression, suicidality, helplessness, and actually acting out of desperation. And that would be a clinical. They both would probably, if I don't know how long they're in there, like the way they were acting, it's like they just went there the day before or something, because they're much more animated than we notice with the people that we've worked with have been held hostage. By the time they're pulled out, they're lethargic and they're almost dead. So you'd have to, I would say, to the Risgar is somehow they just convey that these couple, they're hopeful. I'm not saying he put that in the play, but their animation was really healthy. You saw it, right? They could move, they could rotate, they could jump almost like like they had ballet training or something. But I think his introduction would change all that and say this is one desperate last attempt to feel life, to enjoy life, or whatever. Or they could put that in the script. So no, but But what happens to people is basically the idea is to break them, and so they become comatose, and they'll never resist again, and they will walk head down to their death penalty. Because it's more convenient for the oppressors. They don't fight anymore. So you break isolation, Scott, is one of the ways you kill people is you isolate them psychologically, you kill them first. Emotionally, the greatest punishment of any human is to isolate them from the collective. And if they're in separate rooms or cells, like when we were in Dachau in Germany, we visited those sites. It was intentional. Make a small room and then never let them have contact, and they'll eventually collapse. Not because they're being beaten. You don't have to beat them even. They just, isolation kills for humans. So that's my answer. And that's why the play is refreshingly possible to be different.
George, when it comes to characterizing this in terms of a play, especially with a research background into plays, how do you coach and find actors to be able to portray this in an effective way?
Well, that's a good question, and it's as Marv was saying, that reality, knowing that reality, of course, to play that on stage would be, it'd be so so hard on the audience that they wouldn't. There would just be very few moments that you could be able to tolerate that. I mean, we have seen in films that we see that kind of that almost that torturing of the mind, and certainly there's been playwrights that have really explored that the theater of pain, and certainly in the 30s and 40s there were a lot of playwrights that were doing kind of very, very difficult things to watch, Artaud and other playwrights. Now, but what usually productions of that, they've tried to flip it. So what I think what Rasgar is also doing is almost flipping exactly what Marv was saying, is in a moment of defiance. And I mean, I kept thinking as well, as I've been thinking about the play, that it's almost like if we would see them at some point, that they're really in that state of kind of defeat, but there's like 5% of them or 2% of them that dreams of just bursting out of that, but that the oppression of what the isolation is happening is so strong. But what we get to see is that it's almost like in a dream state, that 5% of like the play is almost existing, that the characters could be almost like lying down, and this is in their imagination what they would like to be doing. So I actually saw the play almost in that state, that they were in what was possible, but the reality was that they would have been sludging around that small confine, and they could barely probably hear the person next to them, but that 5% or 2% in their imagination, which was white, which was not like dirty, and which I'm sure those I mean, the smell of urine and all these things, like you just have to imagine what was really there. Razgar kind of protected us from that and just showed us that 2% of hope. So yeah, does one maybe make that explicit, or do you just have, as an audience member, you have to take that in, though, because it is quite a contrast of what the reality of these folks might be experiencing from the physicality stuff that we saw. Not that the text was pretty bleak at times as well, although hopeful, it was bleak.
And just to close, because I know you have to go at 11:30, what George has triggered is why I felt hope in the space of despair. I thought symbolically they smashed the wall between them.
Mm.
Now, notice they come alive when they make the human connection. It's a very powerful subliminal message that he gave.
Yeah.
As soon as you get one other person who's with you, you can do a lot. Like, it brings you back to life. That's why they separate them, so they don't do that. So I thought that was very clever. They couldn't be doing all that if they were doing it alone. The play was about the interaction. I mean, if you want to do a play as single, look at someone in a cell who's in deprivation. They have done that, but it doesn't look like that. There's no action. They came back to life because the wall was broken. And I wear that hat as a psychologist, I guess, is that you always want to be in connection, even at the darkest times. Working with soldiers, doesn't matter how you're being shot up, but if you're all in there together and you can talk and you can struggle and suffer together, you have a better chance of getting out and living longer. So that's it. Really appreciate having seen it, and you can see I get activated just talking about it. I think he's got a tremendous contribution that he can make here in North America about the reality that's happening in so many places in the world.
Mm.
So it's quite universal.
Words, George?
Yep. Okay.
George, any
Yes.
final words?
Yeah, I'll just that's a great observation, Marv, that the release happens in the communication between the two, and the play does that, I think, beautifully, that there's a release when they have a hope of she gets to speak to her parents through him. He gets to communicate with a girl that he had an interest in, that he was never able to kind of act upon it, and the fact that they both enter each other's stories of the moments of trauma, that they're there to support one another. Like the fourth wall is broken completely, the cells are exploded, but I hadn't really thought that the power of those moments was also that there was the other person there to witness it and to kind of hold on and create space for them to kind of release that before they went to execution. There was a sense of being cleansed with that, but they were always there to support one another. So that dynamic between the two, I think, is that resistance to the isolation. Yeah.
So thank you, Razgar, for persisting in doing this.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.